Thank you so much for coming. I've been meaning to do this for so long. For people who don't know, basically, we'd been in talks to do this for over a month, I think, and it just kept getting, rescheduled for one reason or the other. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Arafat Mazhar on the podcast. Finally, if you don't like me just calling out your name, the bio is itself, I think, going to make you cringe.
No, it's okay. I'm used to that part. My team's trained me to take it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not bad. Why would they have to train you for that? But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know, for whatever reason, first I'm going to ask you why you don't know. But secondly, here it is. Arafat Mazhar is the director of Engage Foundation for Research and Dialogue. He's also director for Shehri Pakistan, which produces civic and legal awareness animations. Hashia History Channel in collaboration with Bristol University, which explores historical events to understand their impact on culture and society. Soch Videos, an award-winning online news platform, Puffball Studios. And he has also directed the amazing Urdu animated dystopian short film Shehr-e-Tabassum, and he has another one on the way called Swipe, which I think by the time this video is up, it'll be out. Thank you so much for joining me on this. Firstly, let's start with Shehr-e-Tabassum.
I mean, first of all, thank you for having me. Yeah.
No, it's my pleasure. Straight off the bat, Shehr-e-Tabassum, I can see the influences that it's made on, if I'm not wrong. So 1984, Brave New World, Blade Runner, all that dystopian stuff. What exactly was your intended message when you made that film?
I mean, I think by that time I had been trying to communicate on various fronts this idea of our anxieties in our culture. What does it mean to be a Pakistani Muslim in Punjab? Dealing with our social realities, our legal realities. So I had been working on the blasphemy laws, related hate speech, doing a lot of project overall on the psychology, theology, Islamic jurisprudence of these things. And I found that our institution was trying to find different forms of telling that same story. And so we had been in a non-fictional way, whether it was civic education, whether it was explicitly about the law, whether it was more about history. I think eventually there was a need to explore and talk about that anxiety that is more intuitive, that is not about an analytical message per se, and to have an allegory that can resonate because it's just unfamiliar enough that you don't get defensive, which is obviously, it's understandable. People can get defensive that don't criticize my culture, which happens a lot. So it's just alien enough for you to feel like, oh, you're not really talking about me, but then familiar enough for you to feel like, okay, are we really headed towards there? But really, it started off with another story idea that I had first in my mind, and I felt like around us there was this idea for me. I mean, with the cybercrime bills being passed, that what happens when radical Islam and technology and fascist elements of the state, if they get together, because I had already studied how the printing press, when it came in, what did that do for radical Islam and extremist Islam? And Twitter is like a million times more powerful than a printing press. So Shehr-e-Tabassum, first of all, was a vehicle for me to explore those anxieties. And then my ex-wife and I, we were talking, and we discussed this idea of essentially, by now, the message really is corruption of expression and language, right? So Ishq and honor are really beautiful ideas. I mean, I started off my journey, changed my journey to blasphemy because I found myself identifying as an Ashiq-e-Rasool, but then figuring, okay, but I don't really fit that mold. So what happened to Ishq in our society, in our culture, and why does it look different in Morocco?
Why is it based on retribution?
Or violence? Yeah. And why does it look different in Turkey when they're celebrating Ishq-e-Rasool? And honor, I mean, the association right away, why is it killing? So how is it virtue if there's violence? So what we wanted to do was what the theory then became was academically, and something that I'm interested in for my PhD as well, that if you take a word and you really crush it and force it to hold only one meaning, then it not only loses its aesthetic, its virtue, it becomes an instrument of control. It's corrupted. And so the smile in this case became an allegory for love, honor in our culture, that you forced it to mean loyalty and only one thing. And now it's no longer going to serve its purpose. And not only that, it becomes an instrument of control. So Ishq-e-Rasool is now an instrument of control. It's lost its beauty. Planting a tree is not Ishq-e-Rasool. Being kind is not Ishq-e-Rasool. It's not seen as such. But using that to win votes, so that's an instrument of control. So that really became, at the end of the day, the principal driving force of telling the story. Everything else, the genre, the setting, was secondary. First and foremost, it was like, okay, we're talking about corruption of expression and that becoming an instrument of control. And the important part was it should be about us. It should be for us, by us, and for the people to explore ki hamari kya hai, what are our anxieties.
Yeah, it's a beautiful short film.
Thank you.
And the brilliance of it is that, like you said, something that should be in its essence so innocent and beautiful, like smiling or Ashiq-e-Rasool, it's been
corrupted.
Yeah, and it's become this mad thing, full of violence and everything that's associated with it. So Swipe is a continuation of that, basically, that inherent idea.
Idea, yes, but so it's not like a sequel, not even a spiritual sequel.
Yeah.
But it is the same idea. But now I'm exploring the other end.
Okay.
So the same group of people who are forcing me or forcing you that honor and ishq should mean this. So what they're doing is they're, let's say, forcing it. Let's say ishq could have meant 8 things. They forced it to mean n is equal to 1, only 1. On the other hand, let's say that's ishq, that's ghazi, that's hubbe watan, a patriot. All of those things are being forced to only this can be a patriot. Now, what about the flip side? So there's a theory, University of Virginia has done a lot of research on it. In fact, Zan Maulvi is involved with it, who was one of my co-founders with me, which looks into these 3 ideas that, okay, something used to hold 8 meanings. What if it holds infinite meanings? So, Shatim-e-Rasool, Ghaddar, traitor, blasphemer. If so that the society will collapse into itself. So Swipe is an exploration of the other end of this. So that was an exploration of forcing something to hold only one value, one meaning. This is more of an exploration of a society absolutely going absurd, that everything is being a traitor, everything is being a Ghaddar, everything is being a heretic.
So inherent insecurity in every corner, in every because I think that's something that maybe I want your take on. Do you think that as we're ironically losing everything that it truly means to be an Ashiq-e-Rasool, you see those people you see those loud voices जो अगलों को गद्दार या जो कहते हैं कि आप आशिक-ए-रसूल नहीं हो, those are getting louder at the same time.
Yes, बिल्कुल ऐसा हो रहा है. And sometimes systematically हो रहा है, sometimes organically हो रहा है. At the start बहुत systemically हुआ था, but अब obviously there's a lot of forcing that this is, and it's all over, it's a global phenomena, right? This is what it means to be an American.
Yeah.
So it's a global phenomena that somehow people, let's say, quote unquote, on the progressive side or on the other end, still haven't figured out how to engage with it, how to empathize with it. But yeah, it's like, I'm not permitted, like if I want, I have love for my people, I have love for my community. But if I talk about something that I feel like has gone wrong or being unfair, then they take away my right to say that, right?
Yeah.
So that is a limiting definition. And on the other hand, what does it mean to be a traitor? If you keep expanding it, eventually the civilization is going to collapse.
Yeah.
It's going to be absurd. And sometimes that's the scary part. We've been working on the film for a year, and we open up Twitter and we're like, it's already there. It's already there. Waqar Zakat's coming up and saying, okay, we're all going to have this hashtag. We're going to catch this person on TikTok because we've decided he's outside the boundary of norms that I feel like I decided. And then everybody's on it.
Yeah. And then the circle keeps.
Yeah. And it's mob virtual justice. And mob virtual justice, obviously, is exponentially more difficult than mob justice. And,
Yeah, definitely. I think social media especially is just like created a sort of very easy, like broken down barriers for people to, collectivize, which is good in certain cases, but it also can lead to all of this. So Swipe, I've seen the teaser. It's extremely chilling and powerful, and obviously markedly different animations and you know the background as opposed to Shehr-e-Tabassum, where it's very real. You can probably sense that it's from a some sort of southern Punjab city, for example, or something like that, and you can sense that it's very real and very, very home. Unfortunately, and the hashtag itself, which is again, it's amazing, obviously, but at the same time, it's haunting. Swipe right for Wajibul Qatl. What is the brief overview of the film that you'd like to tell people, and the message that you want to give away?
I mean, so the film is set in contemporary Pakistan, Multan. I would still call it, if we're talking about in international genres, it's still a cyberpunk film. If Mr. Robot is cyberpunk, right? Yeah. So it doesn't have neon lights, it doesn't have anything, but it explores high-tech, low-life, it explores those ideas. It's set in Multan, and it's definitely meant to be grounded a lot more in reality, but with one just changing one little element, where there's one corporation that's made an app called iFatwa, and you crowdsource fatwas with people instead of with being with a mufti. It was meant for a mufti, so it started off as a joke. Oh, it's a Tinder for mufti, swipe right for Wajib Qatl, left for Mafi, and then I explored that a little bit in my head and decided that it's going to get out of hand. Everybody's going to want to have a say in it. So it's a film set with that's the premise, that everyone's addicted to an app where you swipe right for Wajib Qatl, left for Mafi, and if you have enough rights, then bad things happen to the people. So and obviously it has a lot of themes going for it. I think similar to Tabassum, people are going to get a lot of reads on it. But I think for me, at the real heart of it is just seeing Mumtaz Qadri's son and feeling like
he's part of the...
he's a child, right? And they are feeling like I failed him, feeling a lot of love for him, feeling a lot of sympathy for him, that he will never have any other exposure. All he has are people surrounded around him who want to turn him into the next Qadri. I almost feel like he's a lost cause.
Yeah.
I can't engage with him. I think that loss of innocence of what we're doing with our children, I think that's at the heart of it. There's a lot of other things. I don't think that's the first thing that people will get at it, but I've been at a lot of jalsas where people would bring children. I remember Khadim Rizvi ke jalse mein main gaya research ke liye, and this guy came up right next to me, and they had done a terrific job. This is Karachi, and they had done a terrific job at organizing. Obviously, the left in Pakistan is just never as good at organizing as and they did it based on class. So it was a working class community that was there. It was not bought for. They were genuinely there, which was scary. It looked like a rock and roll concert. It looked like a Rage Against the Machine concert because they had all these songs and everybody was singing it. And the only difference was they were singing Gustakh Rasool ki Ek Hi Saza, and they were so loud, Sar Tanze Juda, Sar Tanze, and they had bass at the back. You know, the music. Yeah, you had the beats at the back.
Head banging, that's the only thing missing.
Yeah, and they had really good sound systems, and the guy who was doing the sound usually does
DJ
concerts.
Bhatti hoga.
No, it wasn't Bhatti, it was Karachi. So he was someone...
He's got the monopoly on everything.
But he does concerts, and then this guy comes in, and he was Aankhein Laal, and I was obviously reading too much into it as well, but it felt like he was in a lot of pain, and he had his daughter, a really cute kid. And I was so scared, ke bachche ko kyun le aaye ho? And then I talked to him, and he was like, कि मैं जो हूँ अपनी बेटी को कुर्बान करने के लिए तैयार हूँ. I was like, God. But obviously, I'm used to these things, so I keep my idea. There's a dispassionate engagement.
Does this happen often? Because I'm not used to this stuff.
So no, not this kind of person-to-person engagement, no. On a screen, sure, but obviously it's still jarring to hear that. But obviously part of my job is to be a bit dispassionate, to try and understand what's going on here. But then I thought he'd say कि नबी के लिए मैं सिर्फ अपने आप की जान कुर्बान करने के लिए तैयार, इसके लिए भी. But he was like, मैं खादिम रिजवी के लिए अपनी बेटी की जान कुर्बान करने के लिए तैयार. I'm like, what is going on here? So there's certain things about how we are failing our children. I was in Jamiyat, all of my family is from Jamaat Islami, and I know what it's like to, अगर मुझे बाद में वाक़ई ना मिले होते, if I hadn't fallen in love, if I hadn't found some texts, if I hadn't found some people, I was being trained to be a leader in Jamaat. And I was probably going to be very good at it. I was always enterprising, and up until 16, I thought music is absolutely haram. So I know there is a journey forward, that permutations that could have been there if the society had given up on me. If people had thought I'm this barbaric, violent person जिसका कोई redemption नहीं है, तो मैं इस वक्त इधर नहीं बैठा होता, मैं मंसूरा में बैठा होता. But people gave me a chance. People gave me a chance, and I think to think about so many children out there, including Mumtaz Qadri's son, because I see his picture from time to time, whose innocence have been taken away from them before they even know what that's like, who enjoy going to, when something's being burned down, you see these pictures of teenagers having a really good time, and you go like, I can't hate them. They're young, and so a lot of that. I mean, I went on a tangent, but to answer that question,
it's amazing. Yeah.
For me, it is about loss of innocence at the heart of it, and how we are failing children, and this is going to get out of hand if we stay where if we remain on this place. It's going to get out of hand.
Yeah, no, I'm going to go on a slight tangent as well. Your story is quite similar in certain elements with Majid Nawaz's story, if you're aware.
Yeah. I know Majid Nawaz.
Yeah.
I know him personally as well.
So, that's because, like, obviously his story, for people who don't know, is that he was a part of Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is an Islamist organization, got captured, and then obviously went the other way later. And so the conversation I want to have with you, which is a great point you bring up regarding children and their innocence, and this is a general discussion and general topic that I've been reading about and looking up, because you have these children, because you have society in which aap choti umar se you are dooming these children, so to speak. So you can basically, in most cases, jo wo bachchi thi aapke samne, you can say that you are dooming a 4-year-old to a life that is in a certain context. How much personal agency can you assign to that 4-year-old who then goes on to, acha, isko ladka bana do, because it's important in this case, because those people are ones that do all the mobilizing and that stuff. 4 saal ke ladke ko ya bacche ko, sorry, aap ye doom kar rahe ho, and then he's the same guy who's going to, so Osama bin Laden was basically once a 4-year-old. Who was brought up in a society and in a way that made him Osama bin Laden as we know him. What are your thoughts on that, and how much personal agency and kitni hum vengeance se unhe dekh sakte hain? Do we need to remove that from our judgment of them?
So for example, I would say that I would answer with a case study, right? Mumtaz Qadri assassinated Salman Taseer. I spent 3 years really motivated by just some lower level, I wouldn't call it disgust, but like at the act, absolutely disgust, but at the human being as well, up until I really got my research down what happened, that Qadri was very much a symptom. Behind him was Mufti Hanif Qureshi, Mufti Ashraf al-Qadri. They were the one. Now, I don't want to say that he's really stupid, but the way authority works in our society, that they had told them that this is our tradition, this is ancient, this is how you have to do things, and they had lied to him. Now, he's still responsible, but it is important, to understand how you make a Qadri. How to make a Qadri is crucial to understand. So very dispassionately, just understanding analytically how that happens. Now, as far as how much are we willing to forgive or maybe see them in an empathetic light? Not even to forgive. Like, you can say that obviously they're responsible, but at the same time, you probably maybe do you need to adjust the lens in a way that you're looking up? Do you want some sort of, like, are you looking at them from a sort of vengeance? I absolutely do. Yeah, I absolutely think. I mean, that's the heart at the heart of our organization. Engage was to engage with the other community. Because the other community, at the end of the day, all over the world, in any civil rights movement or any civil rights conflict, the other community at the heart is scared. So James Baldwin has always been an inspiration for me. It's been the guiding light for me on how we want to look at this, how we want to look at the conflict or the perpetrator, how we want to look at violence. And for him, and no one calls him apologetic. That's the risk, because if you're not nuanced enough, you could be like you're apologizing. Yeah, nuance to chalegi aajkal, unfortunately. Yeah, but like, so Baldwin was like, the white man, there's something that is corrupted, that he's grown up with, that his world turns upside down at the idea that a black man's going to be in my bus. And it's almost like physically and emotionally he's experiencing something that the sun is just coming from a different place altogether. And his sense of reality is completely changed. Now, there's obviously, we expect him to be mature about it. Now, on our case, there's so much fear-mongering that has happened. People think very terrible things about you and I. They wonder genuinely what our agenda might be. And I'm talking about the common non-thought leaders people. So I don't see a lot of sense in engaging with thought leaders who are lying, deliberately misrepresenting. But I do think there's a lot of sense in engaging with people we don't engage with, which was the point of Shehri Pakistan as well. Why haven't we for 30 years bothered to explain in text or animation or any kind of video, आइन क्या होता है, इंसानी हकूक हैं क्या? We go straight to what you believe is barbaric, you are barbaric. But this privilege of knowledge that we have and the exposure that we have, वो सराइकी में कहाँ है, वो पश्तो में कहाँ है, वो उर्दू में कहाँ है? Even when development sector projects मिलते हैं, you have these English projects with celebrities going like, unwoman, unbeat, those kind of things. And like Urdu mein kar sakte hain aap. You can make it more accessible. So the whole point was to make it more accessible and try and have like a conversation. Okay, we're not that different. I'm a bit scared of you. You are a bit scared of me. I want to explain to you that even what you say is violent. Can we talk? Is there a ground? And as far as children go, I think up until 18 especially, we have so much of our population that belongs to that percentage. Social media allows us access to people through a screen in a way that we can't do in person. So that old model of, NGOs doing like Serena Hotel mein 50 bande bithaye, workshops karaya, I never understood that really. But to reach out to 1 million people with very specific interests, so anyone who likes Mufti Taqi Usmani, anyone who likes Ashraf al-Qadri, anyone who's into Tanzeem-e-Islami, I want him to see this video. I don't want you to be on Shehri Pakistan. You already so the whole thing that we've been preaching to the choir for so long, and it's very easy to create these binaries that they've created as well. Now, and I face some resistance sometimes in the human rights community. Sometimes they understand it, sometimes they don't. But the intent at the end of the day is to humanize this conflict a little bit, and also to see कि अगर आपको लगता है कि पूरी पाकिस्तान की majority है ही violent, then might as well pack up and leave. But if you feel there is some humanity left in this society, then you're going to get up in the morning and you're going to go like, you know what, this is a fight worth fighting for. This is a fight that is possible to win. So it's even strategically, emotionally important to say that that's not only possible, but that's important to do, to use a new lens, to use a lens that humanizes these actions. I didn't want Qadri to be hanged for 2 reasons. One, if you're against death penalty, that goes for everyone. Number 2, the real criminals were behind him, and it was a symptom. And also number 3, the moment he died, they turned him into an absolute saint. And then his power became a superhero after that. Imagine like if 20 years later he did a press conference in which he said that, what I did was wrong. And, imagine if we had a chance to talk to him, people had a chance to talk to him, if he had a chance to reflect. And then all of those people who were rallying under his name, and he comes out and he says, okay, it's possible. People do it all over the world.
Yeah, it happened. An interesting case was, I think it was Georgia's governor back in when Jim Crow laws were. So he had a huge speech for segregation and, having all of that. And then he made some sort of bad joke as well and everything that went along with it. And then he stayed senator for, I think, the whole century, the remaining century. And then I think in 1995 or something, he came out and he said that obviously he was wrong, and that had a huge impact.
It would have a powerful impact, And with someone like Qadri, he's iconography of Gird. So we turn him into an absolute bigger than life creature.
So how has the response been like when you've tried to engage in discussions with the other side, so to speak? And are you encouraged by what has happened or what has been achieved by Shehri Pakistan so far?
So the research part of it required me to the research into the articles and the report on Engage Pakistan, and it's available on engagepakistan.com. That required me to engage a lot with thought leaders, religious thought leaders. I've never had the opportunity or the real logistics to have a mass scale engagement with people apart from my own khandan, extended khandan, because Liaquat Baloch, Fareed Pracha, they've always been uncles. I've grown up them coming to our house, so I could engage with them, and I engaged with a lot of thought leaders. So I've talked to them where they've told me that they know that the blasphemy law is wrong, where they've told me ke beta lekin ye zaruri hai, wisdom required, but there's a greater interest in lying right now than to lose this war against the secular.
I'm going to get onto that in a bit in detail.
But for me, the encouraging part, so that was an encouraging part for me, however, because I was like, okay, there's an opening here. Clearly, it would have been difficult if it were a matter of interpretation. If it's like obfuscating the truth, if absolutely straight up lying, then there's a story here. For me, the biggest engagement was the Dawn article and its Urdu translation, because that was the 5th or 4th most read article in the past 10 years at dawn.com. And that's an article that's saying that the blasphemy law is based on false foundations. Now, that's a very radical thing to say. Salman Taseer said something much less radical, but the way it was said allowed me a lot of engagements, a lot of emails, a lot of people used it across the world in academia, but also state ministries, judiciary, it was being used. It's, I think, that with the online animations that we did one for the parliamentary proceeding, how was the law passed and what was wrong. That's where I really found the power of small videos rather than big reports.
Yeah.
I think that's where I would find some encouragement. I wouldn't say extremely encouraged. So definitely people weren't definitely going like, these Qadiani Qatl Kar Do kind of like the generic response. On the other hand, on Shehri Pakistan, if we ever talk about a right that, for example, the right to profess your faith, they would hate it. And so that's on and off. Sometimes it's a good response, but it is at least something new. We get to talk to 52 districts. We get to talk to communities, 60% of whom like Oriya Maqbool. That's what I want. And I think it's a long process before you can really decide if it's working or not. But the process itself is rewarding because we're at least trying something new. We can't follow that same thing that has failed across the world and over the past 30 years in our community. We are failing. I am failing. I've been failing. Everybody's been failing on many fronts. Might not be our fault, but it requires an intervention that's a little more creative and that tries something new. So the optimistic part for me has been small bits and pieces. For example, Shehr-e-Tabassum. At Karachi University, people speaking up very passionately about missing persons because there's a kid that gets disintegrated. Women talking about body politics and feminism very clearly, and people talking about mental health. So that's where the power of fiction came in really handy, that, okay, we're at the heart of matters now. And engaging with students. So whenever we engage with students, so even with seminary students, sometimes we've hired them. I haven't had too much engagement, but with a couple of seminaries, there is this room that I see, almost a gap. If I were a corporate person, I would say there's a market entry jaga maujood that you can be the first entrant. There is a space there to talk to these people, and there are people I know, Professor Ibrahim Musa, who's working with Arafat Mazhar Gujranwala mein. He has a madrassa, Jama Nusratul Uloom. And what they're trying to do is they're getting seminary students who are bright into MPhil programs and then eventually to Fulbright PhD programs. They've sent five to six over there to study history of religion, jurisprudence under exceptional professors, Jewish professors, Muslim professors, atheist professors, Christian professors. So those kind of interventions really fascinate me. And I think overall, just fresh perspectives, fresh ways to do things that go beyond, there's an NGO that's doing workshops in a physical space with 50 people in front of them, half of them who are just there for lunch. That's what, I think I wouldn't be very optimistic about that approach.
Yeah. Just on radical Islam and where we are headed as a society, I've always found it fascinating and also unfortunate that whenever you listen to any scholars, I'm excluding Saudi Arabia here for obvious reasons, but Islamic scholars who are living abroad, like let's say even from the Arabic world, like Egypt, or if you go west, the US, Canada, UK, the version of Islam and the reality of Islam for them and that they're preaching, and people are, practicing there and that's going on there, that's very different from the radical sort of, Islamist Islam that we have here. I was wondering how we came to this point. How is our Islam, like हमारा जो मुआशरा है उसके अंदर इस्लाम की जो एक the view or the lens that we look at, like people look Islam with, it's very different from how Islam actually is, A, and B, how even modern Islam people who are, preaching or studying Islam outside of Pakistan are. So where does that disconnect, where did that come from?
I think, number one, somewhere along the line, हम बहुत जदीदियत के अंदर घुस गए थे, जदीद इस्लाम के पीछे पड़ गए थे. So बहुत सारे thinkers were interested in reforming Islam, and that was the first mistake, where people like Maududi, Israr Ahmad, and a lot of thought leaders, even some Sayyid Qutb from Egypt, but influenced South Asia में ज़्यादा हुआ, where modern Islam is at the heart of a lot of these crises. You wouldn't see a lot of terrorism emerging from traditional classical Islam because that has a room for a lot of competing thoughts. The moment you have two contradictory positions in one tradition, then you're acknowledging it is fallible, that this is a human understanding of religion. On the other hand, the moment you decide, oh, you know what? Forget Islamic tradition, because tradition inherently means multiple positions. It has a past, present, future, it's flexible. But you go like, I'm going to tell you what Islam really says, which implies there's one thing that Islam has to say. That's where you get into really tricky trouble. And these are very smart people, especially, I mean, not Sayyid Qutb, but Maududi, Israr Ahmad. These are really intelligent people. They write very well. Their rhetoric is very good. And all of a sudden you have modern state ideas, and you're mixing these Western ideas with like your own readings, and you disconnect from the tradition. One problem with that emerges directly is that you no longer have space for fallibility. So now when people are looking at Islam, they're thinking not Islamic tradition, they're not thinking Islamic history, they're thinking वो जो एक इस्लाम चीज़ कहता है. So ये जो सवाल है, मैं हमेशा कहता हूँ एक बहुत जदीद चीज़ है कि इस्लाम इस बारे में क्या कहता है. जैसे कि इस्लाम एक इंसान है जो जवाब देगा, इस्लाम इसके बारे में ये कहता है, as opposed to 1200 years of people going like फलाना मुफ्ती की इसके बारे में क्या राय है, and then they would get a position जिसके end पे वल्लाहुल आलम आएगा, God knows best. That human fallibility, which creates an interface, oh, we're not really sure 100%, but that's how we're going to look at things. That's written all across the past few decades, Zia onwards, as well as Piche, Jamaat-e-Ihrar in 35. There are these milestone moments where even traditional groups, Deoband and Barelvi, which were revivalist group, but they were traditional, started becoming very, very political and modern in the way they organize and approach Islam. And South Asia obviously is also unfortunate. Like hamari tarikh bahut violent hai. We've gone through a lot of trauma as a community, and somehow the instruments that the British left for us was ripe for authoritarianism. The way they did on us, then we decided to do it on Ahmadi communities right a few years later. So a very legalistic, legal world, which never was. It's a very white person way of looking at state. As well as the fact that we were an extremely difficult community. We had the Ahmadi community, we had the Shia community, we had the Deoband Barelvi community, we had the Hindu community, and they were all fighting. They were rhetoric, printing presses, they were ridiculing each other up until 1935. In 1927, they passed the first blasphemy law. So it's also unfortunate the circumstances of the kind of theology that the Ahmadi community had would offend the Christian community, because of their beliefs in So it's also difficult. And at the end of the day, also, obviously, what our leaders have done, our thought leaders have done. What is different in sometimes, I think, some of the other countries. So obviously, if you're in a Muslim minority country, it is in your best interest to get with the program, right? So you want to be treated as an equal citizen. So you talk about equal citizenship. The premise of Shehri Pakistan and all of our work is that we need a new jurisprudence for equal citizenship, because there's none. We lived in a time of war and conquest. So you had conquest treaties, and those were agreements between the conquered and the ones that were conquered. So there is no such thing as a citizen. It's a modern concept. And that was just thirsted upon us without any philosophy. So Shehri doesn't have a philosophy. Citizenship does. So how do we develop our own? How does Shehri become more than a bashanda, that you live here and has values embedded in them? Why has the secular elite, liberal elite, you and I have not been able to give some indigenous meaning and value and source and purpose and philosophy under the idea of egalitarian values and citizenship? So the blame goes around, but obviously, apart from the very basic ones that, the leaders that did what they did, from Bhutto's 74 move, and from the militaries allowing Ihrar to go away with what they did, or maybe first doing too much violence against them and then just giving in to Zia, obviously. And even right now, every election, it becomes easy, and then you have no integrity. And too many religious leaders become political activists. And by definition, political activism requires you to compromise. So even right now, you can go to Darul Uloom and still find maybe a richness there in religious practices because they're very isolated. Then you will at Jamia Naimia, which was Mufti Naeem's, who passed away, because he's a lot more politically active. He's going to come on television shows. So there's a lot of reasons there. On the other hand, a place like Morocco wasn't next to Afghanistan, didn't have US pressure, didn't have dollars coming in. People left it alone. They passed the Marrakesh Declaration a few years ago, which was beautiful. And I'd not to romanticize, but they're doing pretty well in the human rights record. We are the only country who kill people for blasphemy under HUD. So either that means we really figured out what Islam is.
Even Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, so Saudi Arabia will kill you for apostasy. But a non-Muslim is insulting the Prophet, they don't have a law for it. So we're the only country that kills both Muslim and non-Muslim as had. Yeah, and ishq. Yeah, and obviously the kind of ishq where the kind where you're like, oh, tumne meri bandi ko dekha hai, main maar dalunga. That kind of ishq. It's that kind of ishq. If you want to call that love, it's still...
Yeah. It's that and nothing else.
That's nothing else, yeah.
Everything else that you would... Okay, so fine, you can profess to love your partner. Sure, you can also do that bit, although it's bad. But if you're doing the other bit, then you can say, chalo, sense banti hai. But we're not doing that bit, but we're definitely doing this one. So relating this to cyberkhilafat, would you say cyberkhilafat is the next step for where we're at right now, when technology mixes with this radical Islam, and what's next for the genre itself?
So, I mean, cyberkhilafat's commentary is pretty much on the present time, even though, so obviously that's not next. It's fictional and it's very exaggerated. Some of it is still very absurd. But the idea is that, a couple of college kids, a girl tweets against a guy, hashtags him, names him, and then all of a sudden you search his name and everybody's saying he's wajib al-qatl. So we're already there as far as using tech to where you make your hashtags into crosshairs. Your hashtag is a crosshair. It's a track, that song we made as well, that your hashtag literally can become a crosshair. You can target someone. It's easier. And there are things that you can say somehow behind a screen that you will never say in person. So जब औरत मार्च हुआ था, तो जब लोग जिस किस्म की ज़बान इस्तेमाल कर रहे थे, the screen helped it. अगर वो स्क्रीन के फ़ौरन स्क्रीन हटा देते और अचानक वो उन खातून के सामने बैठ जाते in the middle of a restaurant, तो जो ज़बान इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं on the keyboard, they won't use that.
Never, yeah.
So the screen doesn't help either. It brings it brings a very violent side outside of us. So, but at the end of the day, cyberkhilafat is a fictional thing. We want to have fun with it as well. It first and foremost tell a good story. It's not meant first and foremost for change or political change. It's film. It's fictional film. And what's next is I want to do an anthology. I want to do, so for example, if Love, Death and Robot had a particular role, I would love to do, and I would love for other people to do it. I would love for people to write graphic novels, to write novels, to write any kind of story, short stories, because people already have those stories in mind. It's just that maybe we're giving it a framework. Okay, hey, how about you explore these anxieties that you're exploring separately? You're exploring the anxiety of technology separately, a very fascist ruler separately, a very extremist Islam separately. How about you look at a Venn diagram and see where we're at when we're at the intersection of these three? And as far as the future is concerned, we are looking forward for a feature-length Tabassum film.
Really? That's amazing.
I mean, we're hoping for it. The thing is, we might have to crowdsource it instead of going with a production team, even popular names, international names, who would dictate how we do it. So that thing starts, it's still pending announcement, but we have and we know the world very well. I mean, Shehr-e-Tabassum ki dunya humne bahut apne paas se, we know what happened in 2030, 2040, 2050, 2060. We know what laws were passed when. We know what kind of contracts were there. We know the history very well. So now it's very easy for us to tell human stories once we have the world built. So we know a couple of stories that we want to tell. It's just, I think, when the time is right, after we're done with this and the documentary and a few other things, maybe we might start a campaign with Swipe, maybe even, but like we might start production next year if all goes well. We might do it, but we definitely have a story. We have a story to tell in that world, and we get a lot of requests for that because there was a thing about the film that leaves you wanting more because you're definitely. Like, okay, what's next?
The only bad thing about it was that I was like, it's over.
It's already over. It's already over. Yeah, and so let's see. There's a demand, and I hope. I may not direct it. I may take a back seat, but let's hope we can do it.
Yeah, that's great. I would love it if you made it into a full feature-length film. So, where do you think we are as a society right now in terms of our socio-political situation? And that I just don't mean that in terms of religion. I mean that in terms of where the state is. With the political situation, everything that's happening right now, censorship, intolerance, the greater good, stability, peace, all of that. Where do you think we're at, and is there a way out?
I mean, these are dark times. There's no other way to say it. These are dark times, and they seem to get darker. But however, we can't afford to lose hope, because if we do, then move elsewhere or just forget it. I can't afford to lose hope. I can't afford to be pessimistic about these things. Otherwise, I can't get up and do what I do. It is dark. I do think, however, that we need to learn, number one, people who want to change something, to respond rather than react. So much of what we do, what I do, what I've done, and I've learned not to do, is have a knee-jerk reaction as well. So how do we take something that has happened, process it, and then have a response that's more processed? Like an individual relationship as well. If you and I enter into a conflict and you say something that I feel is incredibly cruel, I could just react, as opposed to I could process it and maybe respond in a way that's wiser, that may lead to something positive. But to be honest, all of us, I think एक कमी पूरी दुनिया में है, वो प्यार की है, वो tenderness की है, gentleness की है, compassion or empathy की है. I think, and that I think comes through at a bigger scale, can come through art, and can come through an exploration of that through art, and just communicating, just being. Also, the economic system we're in doesn't allow for a lot of, even the kind of 9 to 5 grueling systems that you have. Everybody isn't some kind of a race, doesn't allow for you to sit down for a bit and think about tenderness and gentleness and love when your boss is cruel to you. And your boss has to be cruel to you because that's the only thing he has known, because his boss was cruel to him, or his father was cruel to him. So to break those cycles, ranging from something as big as a state, you have to break. So, capitalism, consumerism, all of those things are inherently cruel. What kind of love can you expect in a system like that? Like the kind that we have, a mix of whatever we have. I'm not necessarily commenting on the variables exactly of economic system, but what it allows, what we have seen it allow or not allow to do. And then just our own emotional processing, to talk about things, to talk about trauma, to talk about pain, to talk about love.
To express love,
To express love, to marry for love, or to make choices that are our own. And then to not be disillusioned by it, to be kind, to be gentle, for that to be the cooler thing than to be like, irreverent and just to be passionate, to do things and be things that, so at a personal level, it's missing, right? So all around us, we have men going to jobs that they hate and then coming back and not necessarily being very kind to their partners, and women trapped in their homes eventually, not to speak for all of them, that they hate. Nobody's benefiting from it.
Yeah.
So love and a culture of love requires a big overhaul, and I'm not at all trained to be able to talk about that, but what I do feel is that just being more emotionally aware, being more loving in our personal lives to start with, to be more tender to each other, men being more tender and loving to each other, expressing that to each other, to maybe reimagine a new way of what it means to be a man, to be masculine. You don't have to lose it. You can still be masculine.
Yeah.
But what does that mean? How can you reimagine that sexuality? How could you love with more of you? It's a healing thing. It's a beautiful thing. And I think it's the most powerful thing that the world has to offer. And I think we're missing out on it.
Yeah, I think it says a lot in our society. I think it would ruffle more feathers if a couple express their love to each other on TV as opposed to two opposing clerics having a go at each other and saying that I should kill you, or you ought to be killed. So absolutely. I mean, it's great that you still haven't lost hope, but some of us are probably towards the end. I mean, it's very difficult to see how you're gonna come back from. I'm sure you've heard that Atif Mia's latest talk was cancelled, and we're at almost exactly the same point, if not worse, than when Abdus Salam had to leave the country and all of that. So
we're worse.
We're way worse. So which is obviously a bad thing. So for hope, if you're gunning for hope, that's not a good thing.
I mean, gotta think big picture, right? So communities go through 100 years of like absolute shit before things go better, right? So what would you say to what the African American community has managed to do over hundreds of years? But they still might feel hopeless. Some of them might feel hopeful. They've achieved so much, but it took them time. And yes, things theoretically are supposed to get worse before they get better. And even you can see it in personal life as well. And again, as I said, as far as I am concerned, I can't afford to be pessimistic. Yeah. And that's something that I learned from James Baldwin. Someone asked him at a very critical time, and he said that I can't afford to. I can't afford to think that things can't change. If I do, then I will just do something else. I'll move to France back again and write novels. I'll just make an animation studio that just does corporate work, makes some good money, or maybe just do music my whole life. There are things that you sacrifice for it. So music, for me, it was music that I didn't get to pursue music as much as I do. I would just do that. But if I want to pursue and commit to an institution, building an institution, a culture, training people, and do something which I feel is bigger than me, because it is nourishing at the end of the day to me, not because it's altruistic, but at the end of the day, it is nourishing for me.
And that's fine.
Yeah, and it's fine. In fact, that is, I think, what that awareness helps me move forward. Then I need to be, obviously, calculated. So I know, I mean, like, I guess there is some cynicism there, because I would imagine, didn't surprise me when Atif Mia's talk was cancelled. So that does say something about me, that there is a bit of cynicism there. There's a disillusionment there. I would just say that I'm practical about risk. If someone says, oh, you got 5 death threats. So I wouldn't be like, oh my God, I got 5 death threats. I'd be like, okay, yeah, I got 5 death threats. That is the community we're living in. But
let's clip that.
No, but on the other hand, if we hadn't done the work that we had done, if Asma Jahangir hadn't done the work she had done, maybe I would have received 15. Right? So that's optimistic.
Yeah, it's a punch. But moving on to death threats, if that never thought
moving
I'd
on to death threats
segue, but the blasphemy law. So for people who don't know, Rafat's done some extensive, and I mean that like in block letters, research and writing for Dawn, as well as a hugely detailed report by Engage, which is on their website. It's called The Untold Truths of Pakistan's Blasphemy Laws. Fascinating work. Really enjoyed going through it and reading it. So if you want to tell people a brief overview of the history of basically how, so for people who don't know, basically the blasphemy law in its current form wasn't always how, like this is not its initial form. The parliamentary proceedings of 1986 started this whole mess, and then there was also the 1991 petition. So just take it away from there.
So the British gave us a couple of blasphemy laws. So every country that they left after they ruined it, they left them with penal codes that had 295. So a lot of countries you will see if you Google have 295. Pakistan had 295 and 295A because both of them were passed. 295A was passed in 1927. And that was offensive remarks against any religious community. And as from what I understand, I think even Jinnah did a yay for it. Everybody was in agreement for it. The Hindu community, the Christian community, the Ahmadi community, everybody was in agreement for it. Then they all come under, the word blasphemy never comes in our penal code or in our actually Urdu conversation. It's a very Catholic term, but uska koi exact term banta nahi hai. So Shatm Rasool, Tawheen Risalat, Ahanat Rasool, those are the terms that are used. Then in Zia's time, we had a couple more adjustments. So we already had 295A, then he passed 295B, and then he passed 298A, B, and C. So all of these are various forms of blasphemy laws. Some of them are about Quran, some of them are directed at Ahl Tashi, two of them are directed at the Ahmadi community. So they were clearly instruments through which you can, marginalize particular communities. But the one law that no one can touch is 295C. And the reason no one can touch it because the state, the judiciary, and then later religious leaders had declared very clearly that this is divinely ordained. It's God's law, and that there is a consensus throughout time and space. It's always been God's law, that if you insult the Prophet, you'll be killed. No ifs and buts. And that statement is factually incorrect, but that's not the only problem. When you pass a law, especially in Islamic law, you go through some juridical process, some process of legislation. You need a source. In our case, the story starts in 82, a very young Ansar Abbasi, a very young teenager Ansar Abbasi with advocate Ismail Qureshi, who I got to meet a lot, went to a thana to file a case against a communist literature in which they said they insulted the Prophet. And they were like, okay, let's file 295A because that's what it's meant for. It's like, that doesn't have a death penalty, they should die. And they said there's no such penal code provision. So they went to Shariat court, which at that time was not federal. The Shariat court mein proceedings hui, but didn't really kuch bana nahi uska. Meanwhile, 86 mein, there were these group of people, Liaquat Baloch, who, strangely enough, every day my father, and I am the director of the company as well, he is at our office every day. Not but my father's office. So I might have a completely different setup. He's there every day. And he I think knows that I speak very clearly against it. Farid Pracha, I've debated face to face in front of a public. But strangely enough, I think he might be our client at my father's side. Anyway, so Liaquat Baloch and Ahsan Iqbal's mother, Begum Nisar Fatma, Tarabul Haq Qadri, there were these 3-4 people who, along with Ismail Qureshi and the bigger Khatm Nubuwwat movement, were behind this. Ziaul Haq wasn't behind it at all.
Just the one.
Yeah, so the thing with Ziaul Haq was that a lot of it's just lazy activism, because you go like Zia's law. So rhetorically that might work, but you're missing the point.
Yeah.
Zia's government actually went on record in July 1986 and said that we don't need another law. We already have so many. And that might be under US pressure.
Yeah.
Who knows? For whatever reason, he was against it. And that's a very big thing to know. Okay, your Amir-e Mumlikat was against the law. So clearly it can't be divine.
Yeah.
Zia probably can't say anything against a divine law. And then they filed a motion ke ye jo aapko ishq nahi hai and pata nahi kya kuch, and they scared them into saying, oh, we do need another law. So on the day of the law, when we...
this is 1991?
This is 86. 1986. Okay. This is summer 1986. Then we go to September 86. Abhi tak koi us pe proceedings nahi hui.
Okay.
And they are gonna file a petition, a motion ke amendment की जाए, 295C बनाया जाए. और हर एक के पास जो पर्चा था, जो कागज़ था, उसमें लिखा हुआ था कि उम्र कैद होगी. एंड हुआ ये कि दे सेट कि हमारी एक प्राइवेट मीटिंग हुई थी जिसमें हमने डिसाइड किया कि हम मौत भी डालेंगे. Now, parliamentary rulings require that you give any amendments 48 hours before with print, 2 copies and everything. And so when people said कि अच्छा हमारे पास नहीं है, they said कि अच्छा पेंसिल से लिख दें. So that for me is a very bizarre sight कि आप पेंसिल से लिखने कत्ल या मौत या whatever, something with such gravity.
Yeah.
And there was one dissenter, Hamza Saab, who kept saying कि what are we doing here? Let's तशहीर मुश्तहर कर दे, एक दिन मुश्तहर कर दो, एक हफ्ता डिले कर दो. Let's
think about this.
Let's he explicitly said lawyers, human rights activists, Islamic scholars, international scholars, उनसे पूछते हैं कि ये सही बात है. And everyone was like कि आप क्या बात करें, एटम बम थोड़ी बनाना है, कानून बनाना है. और इस पे तो किसी and to shut him up as well as to give a source of law, they started giving ijma. So ijma means consensus. So that was used as a rhetorical device to completely shut any dissent. Okay, there's always been a consensus that you will be killed, no matter if you're a Muslim, if you're a non-Muslim, if you apologize, if you don't apologize, it doesn't matter, you'll be killed. And number two, as a source of law. So in Sunni canon, in Hanafi canon, it's a source of law. So if you can prove something is an ijma, you can claim that, hey, this legislation needs to happen. So they gave like 4 to 5 texts as sources, and those 4 to 5 texts was never verified. They just named those texts, and then they also said कि मदरसों के जो आपका curriculum है उसमें भी देख लें. The interesting thing is all those texts, and strangely enough जो हमारा दर्स निज़ामी है, जो मदरसों का curriculum है, उनकी actual text में जाएँ तो चीज़ उल्टी लिखी हुई है. मुसलमानों के लिए ये है कि आपको कलमा पढ़ना पड़ेगा, अगर आप नहीं पढ़ेंगे तो आपको तौहीन का नहीं पर्चा पड़ेगा, आपको इर्तदाद का, अपोस्टेसी का पर्चा पड़ेगा. और अपोस्टेसी को उसी तरह बैन कर दिया था जिस तरह स्लेवरी को बैन कर दिया था बाय द ऑटोमन एम्पायर. इट्स अ थिंग ऑफ द पास्ट जस्ट लाइक स्लेवरी इज. एंड अपोस्टेसी कैन स्टिल बी हैंडल्ड. एक बंदा अगर गलत इल्ज़ाम लगे, वो कलमा पढ़ ले, ही इज सपोज्ड टू बी लेट गो ऑफ. एंड नॉन मुस्लिम्स के ऊपर तो बड़ा क्लियरली लिखा हुआ था कि अगर आप इफ़ यू आर ज़ोरास्ट्रियन एंड यू से गॉड हैज़ एन ऑपोजिट, that's blasphemous. But we still provide them with the right to life and property premised on those beliefs. That is more insulting than insulting the Prophet.
Yeah.
Since we do not kill them for that, we will not kill them for that. So that was the logic across all those texts that they were using to state the other, which is like kill them, kill them, kill them. To the point that there's a jurist who's saying, give them a verbal warning. A verbal warning. Here we are, people who are saying, can we do 6 years and they get killed? And if they do it again, then maybe punish them, but do not kill them. There was a prohibition. This is Imam Tahawi, one of the biggest Hanafi jurists. So you have a whole history of like more than 50 texts that we've scanned in the book that you can go at engagepakistan.com. You download it. You've got the Arabic text. You've got the English translation, Urdu translation. You can have the proceedings. You can connect. Oh, he's talking about Fatawa Shami. What does Fatawa Shami say? He's talking about Fatawa Alamgiri. He's talking about Ibn Abidin's text on. So all of those are there, and you realize they were just lying.
Yeah.
And they were systematically lying. They knew they were lying. So Ismail Qureshi, when I met him, the one who was the architect, he hadn't read any of this because he didn't know Arabic and there was no translation available. And he admitted to it. He's like, yeah, I made a mistake. And he did the same thing in the Federal Shariat Court. First it was just ijma, and by the time we went to Federal Shariat Court, they decided it was had. And that then it becomes like an immutable law that you can use for whatever. And jab tak hum in do, even if you don't change the law, you decide, you know what, we are a bloodthirsty nation, so this is not necessarily a religious law, we just want to kill you. Or we're so offended, we want to kill you. Such bole na. Let's be honest about it.
Yeah.
So if you remove these two factually incorrect things, it takes the pang out of it. It removes, you can then say, acha, theek hai, so it's not God's law, you agree to it. And people have agreed to it. And strangely enough, I found that people have been talking about it for decades. After the law was passed, there were these small journals between madrassa where scholars were saying, "Ek second, that's not our tradition. Hanafi tradition says no."
Yeah.
So there's something off here. And I would read that. I was like, this is so interesting. Television channels always call in the most sensationalist, polar opposite people. They would call in Ghamdi Saab on one hand, Mufti Naeem on one hand, make them fight. But these people who've written these essays in late 90s and early 2000s, they've never been called. But then on a social level, we saw the kind of misrepresentation that would just blow your mind. So if they would remove the word la, so if it said not killed, they would remove the word not and they would print it. They would say it. Reading from a text. We have video proof that someone's reading and he's reading in Arabic.
Someone as in?
Mufti Ashraf al-Qadri.
Okay, so people, okay.
Mufti Ashraf al-Qadri.
Pushing their own agendas, basically.
He was calling for Salman Taseer's assassination. To prove that, he was saying there's a consensus. It's always been like that, so no one can disagree. To prove that, he was using a text,
and
which was
we just
Ibn Taymiyyah's text on
left out.
Stool. And within that, he when it came to his own school's position, he removed not. So it's the antithesis of it actually was. And so clearly he knows. But the people who are listening,
They don't know.
they don't know. These are very difficult texts. Genuinely, you need to have 16
You can't
years of
expect
training.
everyone to open that book up.
And even if they do, you need 16 years, just like a lawyer. These are very difficult texts to grapple with. So the kind of abuse of authority that some of these people have done, and then the kind of abuse of power that people have done by being silent. So a lot of people that I've met, ranging and not met. So Mufti Taqi Usmani was caught on audio saying to people that, in Hanafi law, you don't kill non-Muslims and you forgive a Muslim if he reads the kalma. And someone recorded it in the classroom and released it in social media. And then he was given a punitive measure and he was asked to take it down. So him going out of his way, he never says the law is right, but going out of the way to not stand for truth shows that we need interventions that come from us, and also that we need to involve other Muslim communities. Why don't you have blasphemy laws? But anyway, these are just certain examples. If people look at the text or the blog or even some of the animations we've done, they will see the actual evidence. But the crux of the matter is that there has been a deliberate misrepresentation of the history, not of Quran, not of Sunnah, not a different interpretation, but the history of the Islamic legal tradition. And when you compare the texts that are used to legitimize the law, to pass the law, to interpret the law, and ultimately to codify it as God's law, they're all lies. And when I say all lies, in my experience, they're all lies.
Yeah.
It's not rhetorically speaking. And that means that there's a way of reimagining, reforming the law without ruffling feathers. It just needs, so Council of Islamic Ideology took a report and they signed that we are going to use this. It's just that we need some backbone on part of our elected representatives. And we need to then maybe give them a language that unke sari vote banks nahi khatam ho jate, and at the same time they can do some good. So for me, you can do a lot of good without changing the law, without changing a single sentence, by just putting in some interpretations.
Yeah.
Misal ke taur pe, if someone reads the kalma right away, so he's let go of. So the law does not need to say that. You can have an operating precedent in the judiciary that says that. Or that judiciary says that it does not apply to non-Muslims, by the way.
Yeah.
Just like 298B and C does not apply to anyone but Ahmadis. 295C only applies to Muslims. So these are, you're not changing the letter of the law, but you're saying, oh, this is what our tradition says, we're elaborating on it. So there are strategic ways in which, without saying like, you can defang the lies out of it. Eventually, I don't think there's any point in saying, hey, let's abolish the law. The point should be, how do we protect those who are the margins first? Before aapne agar achhi neend soni ho kehna hai ki meri personal victory ho gayi hai, those people who are on the margins, who are at risk, how do we bring them in and create a more equitable society? And then we can look at principally, humne kya baat karni hai? And then it will be on human terms. Then it will be like, okay, this is not Islamic issue, it's an issue of you are offended.
Yeah.
What do you want to do? Maybe you want to put a fine in? Sure, put a fine in. Is it a civic crime? Is it a crime? Is it not? But it's definitely there is a way forward there as well.
But and I think that's the key part. The way it is right now, had keh ke, it doesn't allow us to have any conversation.
Yes.
Doesn't allow for any room in any sort of way. So for people who don't know, and this is, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people won't know, Sunni jurisprudence fiqh mein, it's prohibited to, is tarah ki had lagana on blasphemy law. Even Abu Ala Maududi, Maulana Abu Ala Maududi, one of the most conservative Islamic scholars that this country has seen, even he has said that the act of blasphemy doesn't leave non-Muslims liable to capital punishment by the state. The question then becomes, sure, there's a deliberate misrepresentation and setting forth your agendas by these people who are leaving out certain words and picking and choosing what to say. Why hasn't that happened in other countries? I mean, I'm sure they're pretty self-interested scholars, let's say, to use the term lightly, in other countries as well. How we given these people such room to have this much of an impact with their agendas?
I would say there are a couple of reasons. A, I hope we're not speaking too soon, because there are small movements in Indonesia, the small movements in Egypt that would like, hey, we want one of those. You know, the one that you see in Pakistan. We want
Really?
one. Yeah. Especially in Indonesia.
किसी चीज़ में हम आगे हैं,
आगे हैं.
unfortunately.
Yeah. So I hope that the Muslim community overall can come together, because it is a Muslim community issue
Yeah.
at the intersection of constitutional language and human rights issue, but it's also an Islamic traditional issue. It doesn't even matter if you're a Muslim.
Yeah.
I've seen non-Muslims in other countries take more interest in Islamic jurisprudence than sometimes
Yeah.
Muslims do,
Yeah.
because it is part of your fabric,
Yeah.
tradition. Anyway, secondly, I feel like our history, the introduction of the Ahmadi community was a big threat for people, and that wasn't happening in other countries the way it happened in South Asia. And the way British played us, and the way British played all the religious sects, and the way the printing press was then used, and how everyone was at each other's throats. And then the way certain religious movements failed, the ones that were against partition. So Ihrar was against partition, and then they found themselves in Pakistan. Now they don't have any political mileage anymore. What do? All of a sudden they register an NGO, Tehreek-e-Khatm-e-Nubuwwat, which is the most powerful NGO in Pakistan. I mean, these are all NGOs, right? We just don't call them NGOs for some reason. So these non-profit organizations have had a huge role to play. And I think what we have allowed partly comes from our political system, lack of civic engagement, also a lot of imposing secular ideas. So if we're in Ayub's times, it's very easy to just see pictures. Hey, we used to dance
Bars,
and stuff.
bars, yeah.
But like, did we engage with the community? Did we talk to them before passing the fundamental rights? Where are these coming from? Or did we just copy paste something from another constitution? What does it mean for elected representatives to give you these rights?
Yeah.
जब आपने बुनियादी तौर पे ही समझाया ही नहीं और उसके अंदर जो फ़लसफ़ा है वो आपकी मिट्टी से निकला नहीं, तो डिस्टेंस तो होगा. And every Muslim community has faced that. Every post-colonial country has faced that. In our case, obviously, us being next to Afghanistan, us being used by America didn't help. Dollars coming in didn't help. The way our state used these religious groups for their benefit didn't help. But I think if it's 150 years history, I think this strange permutation of Christian missionaries that the British brought, the Hindu community that always had been there, the Sunni Shia community, the Ahmadi community, and the friction in all of them at a time when everybody would talk openly against each other. And with the printing press and the kind of text that you find, and the kind of language and the culture of offense that had started in which you weren't engaging, you were literally abusing each other.
Yeah.
You can trace it back to there for me. So that's partly it. Right now, I think also we have become very reactionary in any case. So even if it isn't about religion, things offend us, right? Someone wearing something, someone doing something easily offends us.
Easily offended.
So that psychology of offense, why are we so offended? And I don't mean rhetorically, genuinely. We try to do some research on it, but someone needs to really do like a deep dive 5-year PhD on the psychology of offense in Pakistan, or psychology of offense. Like, do people want to be offended?
So there's this professor from the NYU Stern Business School, Jonathan Haidt. He's done a lot of research on not exactly offense, but disgust and stuff that we're seeing right now, especially, in the West. We're seeing these different movements and how people are not exactly the sort that we see here on Twitter, but basically mobs getting together virtually and hunting people down and all of that stuff. So that's pretty interesting.
Similar.
It's
similar.
Very similar.
So we need something like that for us as well. And I think it's strange, almost like people want to be offended. There's a high to it as well. Yeah. There is what part of your brain gets lit up when you're offended. Do some scans, figure out, do primary interviews, sure, but also do something more scientific to understand ho kya raha hai and what are you compensating for. At the heart of all of it seems to me, intuitively, not empirically, seems fear. Like people are afraid. And what do you do when people are afraid? How do you counter fear? I think maybe those are bigger questions than later to grapple with. Yeah. Overall, don't be scared. It's just me, You won't be scared if you knew me.
Exactly. I think you're spot on, because one of the things that, because he's a social psychologist, he referenced Hitler. And Hitler was a cleanliness freak. And his whole idea was that he was, so essentially fear hi tha, but fear translated into disgust for the Jewish community. And his whole, if you do a sort of like a psychological deep dive into it, it was like he wanted to cleanse.
Yeah.
वो disgust वाला element होता है. It's the
Yes.
same if we see something unsavory or something like that. तो वो वाला उसका trigger होता था
Yes.
response, and that's, I mean, not to that extent, but that's something that we can probably look
No,
towards.
I feel like I've read a short form of this article, because disgust, I remember being constantly mentioned when I tried to look into it primarily at the start. Disgust is somewhat it as well. You weren't disgusted when Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan in the late 80s would sing about really things that were pushing the boundaries. In fact, Imran Khan is sitting with Amitabh Bachchan and he's saying, sing it again. Now, if he were alive today, Imran Khan would just walk out. It's like, I don't want to be seen with him singing that.
Yeah. He'd probably get killed or something.
Yeah. And so why wasn't it disgusting then? Why does it disgust you now? Are you disgusted by yourself?
That's a deep question. I mean, are you disgusted by yourself? And also, do you not, it's inherently not knowing the other person like yourself. If you just got to know me, and it's the same for every marginalized community. If you got to know them, you have way more alike than you do, like all these social constructions of segregation, and we're way more alike than, it meets the eye. Just lastly on the blasphemy law, if I'm not wrong, Salman Taseer's assassination or murder, however you want to call it, was the tipping point for a lot of the recent, I think 2010s के अंदर जो आपने uptick देखा है in the everything related to blasphemy laws. Why is that the case, and how much of a difference has it been?
It's sort of like, it's just escalation. I think I remember an interview Christopher Nolan was giving for Dark Knight, how the theme that he was interested in was escalation. That how every time Joker did something and the response Batman had was that of escalation. And I think Jim Gordon, even in that film, talks about it. In Batman Begins, at the end of the Batman Begins, he says, what about escalation? You bring this, they'll bring automatic. You'll bring that, they'll bring... So it gets heightened. I think the moment that happened, when Salman Taseer said what he said, without any value judgment on whether that was strategically correct or not, it was an escalation. Then Qadri comes in and he really escalates it. Then we have, as a community, we have a question to settle. Was he right? Was he wrong? And then we have, on television, everywhere we have escalation. And at that point, even people who tried not to escalate weren't given room. So Javed Ghamdi was one of those people and his whole team who were trying to make sure, hey, let's not escalate, let's calm down, let's talk. But he was given death threats and sent out of the country. Somehow, escalating parties, both on, let's say, the NGO circuit and, like, which I'm a part of, let's say, I'm not, but like, let's say I'm part of the symptom of that place, that you escalate, you don't respond, you don't process, you're not trying to understand. The more you react, it's a cycle that keeps on escalating. It's escalating. And the Qadri incident really, before you know it, you realized, oh my God, it's this high. And अब मैं ये भी नहीं बोल सकता कि इस कानून में गलतियाँ हैं. So the official stance of every organization then became कानून misuse होता है. So you were escalating, and then you dropped down here. And I remember that time I used to attend a lot of human rights meetings, and they were really angry, as they should be. And they had a right to express that anger. But there was something in that language that felt alien to me, because I came from a very different background, and I listened to them, and they were talking about how it was against this human rights, and this was against Geneva Convention, falana. And I was like, मैं इसका क्या करूँ? लोग इसका क्या करें? Why should they care? They don't know what that convention is. They never asked for it. You signed it. No. They've never been explained to them. मुझे भी समझ नहीं आ रही आप क्या कह रहे हैं. Let alone them. And this was young days for me, like, let's say 5 years from Jamiyat, 7 years from Jamiyat. So I do feel like some of the language that we also had in reaction to that, we didn't really know how to resonate with people. Not that I know, okay, we do now or I do now, but we at least have an awareness right now that udhar se escalation hoegi. We need to continue telling stories, we need to catch up, and we need to make sure that we're not always reacting, that we have our own original language, conversation, educational intervention, storytelling, cultural arts, that is not just an escalation of the issue. Maybe blasphemy isn't something that's shouldn't be at the center of every conversation. Maybe it should be civic education that should be at the center of every conversation. And there are points where I need to put a check on myself. Okay, why am I so obsessed with this particular thing? It is at the end of the day a symptom of something deeper. And what I can get is it's anger. Okay, you've been lying.
Yeah.
But if I have to think systemically, the solution lies first at the heart. Aapne Panadol to dene hai, but like the antibiotic is something else.
Yeah.
So my documentary can't be, oh, gotcha. It has to give some space for grace and room and redemption for people who may have misrepresented. Because it may not be that easy, maybe. If I were on the parliament, it may not have been that easy for me to stand up and say, you know what, because I have a wife back home, let's say, I have children, I have like grandchildren, I'm scared for them. It's maybe we need to figure out better ways. But yeah, I think it was escalate. I define it as that part, and that film, and that what Nolan said about escalation, what happens for me even as a conflict resolution idea of just being two parties. There's just 1 and 0. There's no gradation.
Yeah.
There are 5, 10, 12 takes on it. Have a gradation of takes on it. What's happening with gender is something better, because you have 5, 6 variations of feminism that you see across social media.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, one is this and one is that. But unfortunately with this issue, it was very much, oh, you have the hardcore godless humanist seculars and the protector of the religion Muslim community, and there's
no in between. You gotta pick a side.
Which is the majority of the community, was not represented, I'd argue, at least.
Right. And just on the documentary then, it's a documentary on the history of the blasphemy laws, like we mentioned right now. Have you decided a date? Can you give us more information?
So haven't decided dates. It's a lot of interviews as well. So it's a proper documentary, and we're still trying to figure out what's the right way to tell it, what's the sensitive way to tell it. I have no interest in offending anyone.
Yeah.
I have an interest in talking to people.
Yeah. You actually want those people to see it.
Yeah. We want them to see it, and I don't want to say, oh, you were wrong. Yeah. I'm going to ask you, okay, what do you think? What do we do now? Let's figure it out. But it is a combination of, it would probably be, the form is contemporary. It probably more looks like a long form Vox documentary than a traditional documentary. I can't really lock a date right now. I do unofficially, but it's a difficult project. That one is a difficult project. I think it's a burden on me sometimes, because the stakes seem high, because we're sitting on very important information, so it feels like, okay, it's a responsibility as well. We have very good interviews, but the interviews are difficult sometimes to get. There are certain interviews we didn't get because people don't want to say it on camera. But I have my fingers crossed. I think once we're done with Swipe, I think by the end of the year, people might have something. The Senate might have something to see as well. They see things sometimes in the Human Rights Committee. Hopefully, we can do some good with that. Hopefully, we can create not just an awareness, but a knowledge resource pool. If someone wants to identify कि मैं आशिक रसूल हूँ, लेकिन मैं violence में इस तरह की नहीं करता, तो उनके पास कोई आइडेंटिटी को मेंटेन करने के लिए तरीका रिसोर्स मौजूद हो. Hopefully it can act as that as well.
No, definitely, man. I mean, you're doing some absolutely wonderful work, and even for people like me who probably have a lot less hope than you do, I'm just glad that people like you are around and you have the hope that you do, which allows you to work this way. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Probably the most fun conversation I've had on this. I hope you return whenever you release your documentary. I hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah.
Everyone listening, please go check out Arafat's long list of content.
I'd say, like, for now, Swipe film, go there, because that's the first thing that they'll see.
Yeah, so you want to plug that?
Yeah, so Instagram /Swipe film. it's releasing 31st October, so that's just 6 days away. Yeah, that's a scary thought. And it's going to be accessible for everyone. It's not meant for festivals for white people to go and watch and take der saal before our own people can see it. So please watch it, share it, and follow it for we're going to share some screenings, virtual screening links there as well. So you can check that out. It's Facebook as well. Just if you go to Instagram, there's a teaser and other links as well. So just follow that, and once you're done watching that, then we'll talk about other things. Otherwise, you have got Shehri Pakistan and Hashia, which are like critical history and civic engagement pages. You can easily check that out as well. And Puffball is basically really the animation studio under which we do the fictional filmmaking. So yeah, hopefully this works out well. Hopefully people take from the film what it is meant to be, and we're all good to come back here and talk about the next step.
Yeah, we're wishing you the best of luck.
Thank you so much.
Put the links down below for everything that you've just talked about. Once again, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Until next time, take it easy.